Are you a zoomer enjoying all your gadgets and gizmos on your guns like weapon-mounted lights so you can see in the dark and modern optics so you can see your target? Don't tell me you have night vision. You want to own the night? Yeah, okay, but you think lugging around a big, heavy rifle with all metal handguards makes you a man? It doesn't. You need a good old boy's rifle. In God's caliber. Ditch all that metal and get plastic courtesy of Mattel. Ditch all the unnecessary controls and go slick side. Remember, make McNamara proud.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Purposeful Armament, and today we have a super cool rifle, and yes, it is the direct result of the spread of communism. We will get into that in a little bit, but the rifle we have is a Colt 604. Well, not an actual Colt, this is a reproduction, but we are going to be talking about the actual Colt 604 and utilizing this very accurate reproduction to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. This video is going to be talking about why each decision was made, all the way from implementing this rifle itself to things like why this flash hider, why no forward assist, stuff like that. So if you had any of those questions, I will be answering all of them in today's video. So let's go all the way back to what led to this rifle's creation. Back in the 1950s, the United States military was attempting to upgrade their M1 Garand rifles to something more modern that would fire the smaller 7.62x51 NATO standard cartridge. Now, this program would be known as the Lightweight Rifle Program or Lightweight Combat Rifle Program, either or. The point was, it was supposed to be a lightweight rifle. Now, to save you a lot of the boring details, the US military ended up adopting the M14 over all other designs. However, Eugene Stoner did submit his design for the AR-10. Although it wasn't picked, he did submit it and they did test it. Now comes a little conflict known as Vietnam. Now, in the early war, the M14 was going up against the AK-47. You guys probably all know what an AK-47 looks like. Now, a lot of the soldiers actually complained quite a bit about the M14, especially comparing it to the AK-47. Now, number one, the gun was pretty much completely uncontrollable and fully automatic fire. Now, I know you can find videos on YouTube of people controlling the M14 in full auto, no problem, but you have to understand their skill level versus a typical grunt skill level, especially a conscripted grunt skill level. It doesn't really match up super well. And number two, and this is going to piss a lot of the gym bros that get mad whenever someone complains about rifle weight. The rifle was heavy and the ammunition was heavy. They were not able to carry enough ammunition to maintain fire superiority over the AK-47. Now, the M2 carbine was also utilized in Vietnam and actually had a pretty good track record. The soldiers liked how light the rifle was and how light the ammunition was, but the round itself was actually very underpowered for direct conflict. Now, that leads to the creation of the 223 round, which was originally a 222 round. Now, even though this 222 Remington round passed all of the ConArc standards that were provided, they determined the chamber pressure was a little too high for their liking, so Eugene Stoner just simply increased the diameter of the bullet ever so slightly, bringing us to that 223 Remington cartridge. And thus 223 was born. That became the new round of the AR platform. Now, it was chosen for a handful of reasons. Number one, the round itself was much lighter than 7.62x51 NATO, meaning that soldiers could carry far more of it to maintain that fire superiority. Number two, the smaller round had far less recoil, meaning it could be more controllable and fully automatic fire. And number three, the small, quick bullet would destabilize as it hit a soft target, meaning that it could maintain the same wounding characteristics of its larger counterparts. So now that we've talked about the caliber, we can get into the design choices of the rifle specifically. So I'm going to go from the tip of this rifle all the way to the butt of the rifle, and we'll talk about all of the design choices they made. I do want to make one note. This rifle is just labeled as an M16. Could be called a Colt 604, M16, AR-15, but not an M16A1. So let's talk about the flash hider. The early models of the 604, M16, would have a 3-prong duck bill flash hider. Now this flash hider was fine, it did okay, but there were some issues with it. Number one, it was quite prone to breaking. The metallurgy at the time was not as good as it is today. Number two, it had a tendency to snag in things like netting, and more importantly to Vietnam, had a tendency to get snagged in brush and vines. So they opted to change the flash hider design to the standard A1 birdcage. But for the A1 flash hider, it is timed all the way around. Now, they found number one, that this prevented it from getting snagged in any shrubs, vines, netting, anything like that. And also, it actually did a slightly better job at decreasing the muzzle flash than the 3-prong duckbill. Now, the barrel. It is a chunky and it is a long boy. The 604 M16 AR-15 originally had a 20-inch barrel. Now, why was a 20-inch barrel chosen when today we see 16 and even shorter? Well, they determined back then that the 20-inch barrel was the absolute best performance that you could get out of the 223 round. It had the best velocity characteristics, which allowed it to pass the aforementioned specifications. And with the gun also being lighter and shorter than the M14, having a 20-inch barrel really wasn't that big of a deal back in the day. Now, interestingly enough, this rifle actually did start out with a 1 in 14 twist rate. However, that was designed for the 223 round. So adding that extra little bit of diameter in the bullet caused them to have to slightly increase the twist rate to make sure that the bullet would still stabilize as it left the barrel. Now, it doesn't really work great with heavier ammunition or shorter barrels, but it works great with a 20-inch barrel for 55 grain. And this length of barrel also allowed for a rifle length gas system. Now, the gas system is part of what made this rifle so reliable. Now, this is quite a great distance for gas to travel through the system. With such a great distance, that meant a decrease in gas pressure. And with the lower gas pressure, the gas port needs to actually be larger to allow for a higher volume of gas to enter back into the system. With both of those things considered, that means that the gas is hitting the bolt carrier group with relatively low velocity. And that lower velocity translates to less felt recoil, which is absolutely genius, and again, why the rifle length gas system was used for this firearm. Now, why direct impingement versus something like a gas piston? Well, again, you have to remember that this is a scaled down AR-10. And the AR-10 was developed for the lightweight combat rifle program, meaning that everything that was done to that rifle was in the effort of keeping it as light as physically possible. And same thing for the AR-15. This is meant to be an extraordinarily light rifle. So direct gas impingement was chosen because it's not very heavy. It's just this small tube that runs the length of the rifle. It's very, very lightweight and very compact. Now, I couldn't find a lot of verifiable evidence of why the front sight post was designed this way, so I'm going to kind of speculate a little bit. I can say this was designed to integrate in with the gas system, which I think is fairly obvious, but a post is a fairly standard front sighting system for pretty much any rifle. AKs have it, the M1 Garand had it, M2 carbines had it, M14 had it, so it probably was just a standard kind of sort of front sight option. Now we get to the handguard. And this is very, very interesting design of this handguard. This rifle, again, being designed to be as lightweight as possible, has a fully plastic handguard, again, to cut down on the weight. Now, some people might freak out, and soldiers definitely did whenever they said plastic. It is a durable plastic, but it is still plastic nevertheless. Now, underneath the handguard, it does have some heat shielding to help protect your hand from the hot gases that are expanding inside of this rifle. And you are also going to notice you have vents across the bottom, well, halfway up the bottom, and then across the entire top of the rifle to help cool some of that system down. Now, probably also notice halfway down the underside of the handguard, the venting stops. That, as far as I know, is just because of the manual of arms. People typically wouldn't be fully C-clamped out. They would have their hands more close to the magazine. So in an effort to kind of protect their hands a little bit better from the heat, they would have the bottom venting completely covered. Now, as for that classic triangle shape, why did they choose the triangle shape? Now, there's not really a whole lot of information that I could find as to why. I watched pretty much all of the Eugene Stoner tapes, scrounged through the internet as much as I could, but I couldn't really figure out why they decided to go with this triangle style handguard. So I'm going to speculate a little bit and use some of the information that I was able to find. Now, I think this handguard was designed like this for ergonomics. It's larger at the bottom so it can sit more comfortably in the palm of your hand. Now, that larger underside to the handguard could also make it easier to fire when you're in the prone or off of sandbags or off of other barricades because you have a larger surface area to hold the rifle on. Again, that's just speculation. That's kind of what I think, but I'd say it's a pretty good guess as to why this was designed like this. Although whenever the Marine Corps would show Stoner their new A2 style handguard, he actually did prefer that over this triangle handguard. Let's talk about the receiver. So Stoner designed this actually very cleverly. Now, in order to keep the weight down, again, that's kind of the whole theme of this rifle is lightweight, lightweight, lightweight. He decided to craft this out of aluminum. Now, the front locking bolt allowed for an extension of the barrel to be created from steel so it could withstand the higher pressures of firing that .223 round. But the rest of the receiver is just a shell containing all of the components. So it could be made of still a decent metal, but not quite as robust of a metal. And it really didn't take any of the stress of firing the weapon, so it could be crafted of this aluminum alloy. Now, the carry handle. This is probably one of the most iconic features of this rifle is its carry handle. But why was the carry handle chosen? Well, it's pretty clear. They wanted an easy way to carry the rifle. That's basically it. It also provides pretty decent protection for the rear sight as well as being the carry handle. Now, on the original AR-10, the carry handle was also designed to help protect the charging handle. They moved the charging handle, we'll talk about that later, but the carry handle remained the same. Now, let's talk about the rear sights of this rifle, which are also very, very interesting. Of course, it's designed very similarly to the previous battle rifle sights of the M1 Garand and the M14. And this was actually a large point of contention in the development of this rifle. Stoner actually went back and forth with the military several times on the design of this rear sight. Now, there are two different apertures in the rear sight, and you can adjust them simply by flicking forward. Well, that's how forward, flicking back or flicking forward. Those two apertures were designed in that way to allow for use of the rifle in different lighting conditions and at different distances. Now, originally, the military requested non-adjustable rear sights. You see, they noticed that in the field, during combat, soldiers tended to kind of fiddle with things. And what else is there to fiddle with on an M1 Garand or an M14 besides the caps that hold your zero? Now, Stoner, being a smart man, kind of talk them out of that, because if they're not adjustable and they're only adjustable by an armorer, that really, really significantly hurts the rifle's capabilities. So Eugene Stoner talked them into this design. This design could be adjustable, but not easily. This requires you to take a round and push down to adjust your rear sight. That kept soldiers from fiddling with it in the field or during combat and unzeroing their rifles, but it also allowed them to zero the rifles if need be. Now let's talk about the rest of the upper receiver. This upper receiver is completely slick side, which means there is no brass deflector and there is no forward assist. And even when they did add a forward assist, Stoner didn't really agree with it. He designed this rifle the way he designed it. If there is some issue with your rifle, you shouldn't be trying to force a round into the chamber. So he thought there was really no need to add the extra complexity and the extra cost of adding a forward assist to the rifle, because in reality, if your round won't seat into the chamber, you should just take the round out and see what the issue is, as opposed to trying to jam it into the gun.
The rationale was that if the weapon is dirty enough or has sand or dirt or mud or something and doesn't close, the first immediate reaction should be is to open the bolt and try to find out the cause of it and not beat it shut and then find out you've got a disaster on your hands.
I have shot this rifle left-handed as well. I've also not had any issues with being hit in the face with brass either, so I tend to think that he probably just didn't really want to add extra complexity to the machining of this rifle, so he just left the brass deflector off. And at the time, most soldiers were shooting right-handed anyways, So it kind of makes sense. So while we're on the upper receiver, let's talk about the bolt. Now the bolt is designed to be easily removed from the rifle and replaced. With this bolt, it kind of auto headspaces, I guess. I'm not a gunsmith, I'm not super sure about it, but all I know is that this bolt can come out of this rifle very, very easily and be replaced with another bolt also very easily, meaning that the repair of this rifle is relatively simple, quick, and easy. Now you'll also notice the design of the bolt carrier itself. There is quite a bit of space that's just been cut away, and that's to, again, cut back on weight. If it wasn't structurally needed for the bolt carrier group to successfully perform its functions of carrying the bolts, then it was removed. Now the charging handle was moved from its original location inside of the carry handle to behind the carry handle right here. Now they did use a sort of diamond style charging handle, but apparently they had some issues with soldiers manipulating that with gloves on in more Arctic conditions. So they opted for the traditional T handle that we see now to allow for a little bit better, a little bit easier grip of the charging handle. And he also designed this to be as simple and easy to use as possible, and for the most part it is ambidextrous. So let's talk about the lower receiver. Again, the lower receiver is made from that aluminum alloy, meaning that it is nice and lightweight. Now some of the early models of the 604 would have what is known as partial fencing, which means that this raised area on top of the lower receiver would be the only fencing present on the rifle. Later model 604s, including this reproduction, would have full fencing. Now this top row of fencing would prevent the dust cover from laying flush against the lower receiver, meaning that you could more easily grab that dust cover and flip it up. Now the full fencing would be added to protect mainly the magazine release. I would assume that they noticed the magazine release being a tall button that's just on the side of the receiver could very easily get accidentally pressed as they're, crawling through shrubs, crawling through brush, maybe just naturally as they're walking around, it could rub on kit or something and activate the magazine release, and the magazine would drop out of the gun. So adding that full fencing would prevent that for the most part from happening. And speaking of the magazine release, Eugene Stoner didn't really want you to have to break your firing grip for any reason. So he put the magazine release in a spot that would be very easily accessible by a right-handed shooter, and the magazine will just drop free for the most part. Sometimes you got to kind of break these magazines in a little bit, but once you get them broken in, they drop free. You can also see that design choice with the safety selector. What is the most likely position for this selector to be accidentally turned to as the soldier is using the rifle? With it pointing forward, this was probably the most likely position that the safety selector would be accidentally brushed into. Since that was the most likely, they decided to make that safe. It really wasn't thought out any more than that. And also it was positioned there by your thumb so that you don't have to break your grip whenever you are changing it from safe to fire. Now, in terms of the trigger, there's not a whole lot to say specifically about the trigger itself. It works fine. It's nice. It's a nice curved trigger. It's comfortable to shoot, all of that kind of thing, but I couldn't really find a whole lot of information. Now, one thing I want to talk about before we move on to the pistol grip and the buffer system as well as the stock of this rifle is the magazines. Why was 20 rounds the standard at the time? Why didn't it come with 30 rounds? So 20 rounds was standard at the time. Now, I can't really find much information as to why 20 rounds was chosen for the AR-15 specifically, but probably because the AR-10 had 20 rounds, the M14 had 20 rounds. 20 rounds, which is kind of the standard battle rifle capacity that they had at the time. In the same way that today, 30 rounds is our standard capacity, 20 rounds was their standard capacity. Another point that the communists essentially helped develop was the magazine size and the increase in capacity. Soldiers, whenever they went up and fought against the AK-47, well, they didn't like that the AK had 30 rounds and they only had 20 rounds. So after enough soldiers complained, they decided for morale, to boost morale, to increase the magazine size to 30 rounds. A lot of different things were wrong with the 30 round magazines. They were not reliable. It was a whole big mess and took a while to get that all figured out. So the pistol grip, the stock, and the buffer system. Now, all of these are designed with each other in mind. They kind of all go hand in hand. And they are all carryovers from the original AR-10 design, which, if you remember, lightweight .308 battle rifle that was controllable and fully automatic. And that's why the buffer was introduced. What this buffer allows you to do, and what the stock allows you to do, is to maintain better control of the rifle in fully automatic fire. If you look at a traditionally stocked rifle like the M14, and you look at how the recoil impulse is going to behave, you'll see that it's going up and over your shoulder. As opposed to the M16, AR-15, 604, with that buffer tube, you're getting the recoil impulse directly back into your shoulder, right? So the pistol grip was just significantly easier to control the rifle just in general, as well as under fully automatic fire. The buffer system and stock system are kind of one and the same. They are both designed to help you be able to control that recoil by putting it directly back into your shoulder as opposed to up and over your shoulder. When they were testing this design, they actually originally wanted a traditional stock on the rifle. So imagine this, but with a traditional, M14 style stock. And they very quickly realized that it was significantly harder to control the recoil of even 223 with that traditional style stock.
They were aware of the AR-10 down at the infantry board, but it didn't look like a conventional rifle. So they said, can't you take this technology and put it into something more or less conventional? And I said, well, I have a design that we've tried out, but I didn't like the recoil characteristics. It tried to climb and all that with a conventional stock. So I built one, more or less scaled down the other. And when the weapon was all together and firing, everybody decided it wasn't as easy to control as they all expected.
So they decided that maybe the engineer knows what the fuck he's talking about. So they decided, let's listen to the guy, and let's use the buffer system. So this whole rifle's inception is from communism, right? The spread of communism into Vietnam led to the North Vietnamese being armed with AK-47s. And whenever those AK-47s came up against M14s, the soldiers really identified how outgunned they truly were. So the communist rifle led to the inkling of an idea that we needed a new rifle. So I'm being serious, this rifle was a legitimate direct product of the spread of communism. That wasn't just a clickbait title. So that's the AR-15 M16 604, why it was designed, how it came to be. That's pretty much everything that I could find about it. I spent hours listening to all of the Eugene Stoner tapes on YouTube. If you guys are interested in those, definitely check them out. They're very, very interesting. Good bits of history on the design of this rifle. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you even more enjoyed the decisions that were made all the way from, Vietnam and communism to where we are with the AR-15 design as of today. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment below. If you are not subscribed, remember to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Remember, stay armed.